We are business consultants and our product is insurance. So first and foremost, what we need to be able to do is understand who we're talking to and the stories that they're telling, and be open and honest about what's going on.
I realized that my job was to lead, not to manage, not to micromanage for sure. And so my day started off every day with literally just doing a lap around what we called the racetrack in the store. That's just the perimeter. But I was a politician, man, shaking hands, kissing babies, noticing, asking about families, kids, how'd the Little League game go last night? You know, probably working in what's our plans for today? How are we going to do it or whatever? But I had a really good relationship with the people that were on my team, like everybody from the bag boy all the way up to my co-manager.
There were a couple things I had to do in order to break into it. One, when you don't know what you're doing, you really do have to lean on people with more expertise. I think that's a big part of it. But then two, you have to really focus on educating yourself and building that expertise over time.
And I think that if you focus on the people, the product, and the process of who we're talking to and take it away from ourselves, look, these people know we sell insurance. That's what we told them when we booked the appointment. We don't need to go vomit it all over them when we get there, but focus on them.
When I listen to people in the insurance industry talk about who they serve and who they sell to, it's not hard to find trucking. It's not hard to find contracting. It's not hard to find manufacturing. It's really hard to find somebody that serves health and human service organizations.
When I was working full time, I was literally running a grocery store, 90, 100 hours a week. And I was going to school at night full time to finish getting my degree.
I love hearing the why, because the why with these organizations is so compelling. I'm so drawn to these industries because I think I'm dealing with the best people in the world. Usually I'm dealing with the people that have been traumatically hurt in a terrible way. They've been abused, neglected, beat, forgotten, pushed down. And they are the redemption stories. They're the people that came back.
When you start thinking of social services and even in a broader scope, nonprofits, there is just a lot of opportunity there. And to your point, there aren't a lot of producers who specialize in it, but there also aren't a lot of underwriters who specialize in it. I say it all the time. I'll probably not stop saying it. I'd say it to my sons that are in the agency. I say it to my producers, but we really need to focus on what are the problems people are facing and how can we solve them? And guess what? Insurance isn't always the answer.
If you lose your audience, then it doesn't matter what you say. And if what you're saying is impenetrable, it doesn't matter if there's gems in there. You have to find a way to bundle what you're saying in a way that can be heard. And that's talking to people about what they do every day. And it's being an insurance translator. It's helping them envision what happens in a business every day.
I say it all the time. This industry is not that hard. It's actually pretty easy. I mean, there is some technical knowledge you have to have, but the people who make it hard are the ones who don't want to put in the work. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. And today, we have the fruits of my LinkedIn labor of cold outreach to people to come on as guests, people that I see popping up all over the place. And you're going to hear from quite a few of them that you may or may not hear on podcasts over time. But Daryl Henry is a guy that I know has followed me and vice versa for a few years now, and I really haven't had an opportunity to meet him or talk in person, but I know that he's heavily involved in social services, and that's because he does an excellent job of letting everybody know that on LinkedIn specifically. So I think we're going to talk a good bit about, number one, how'd you get in the industry? Because that's what my, duty is as a podcaster, is to find out how you got into insurance. That's the one question we all ask. But really, what pushed you into social services? And then I want to talk a little bit about what your strategy's been around building your personal brand around that, because I feel like you've done a really good job, man. And I'm not just saying that to pander to you. You're out there. Anybody can go see it themselves. So take it away. I've talked enough.
Hey, thank you so much for having me here. I've been listening to you for years. So in some ways, it feels like I've arrived by coming on the podcast.
Set the bar higher, brother.
I saw your message come through on LinkedIn, and I said, oh my gosh, I've arrived. Glory, glory, hallelujah. So, introducing myself, I'm Daryl Henry. I work at Bittner Henry Insurance Group. I'm a certified insurance counselor and a certified risk manager. It's a fourth generation family business. So
Hmm.
the business goes back to 1938, and there's two threads in the Henry family. There's mission work and there is insurance. It goes back to my great grandfather Orville Bittner, and he started an insurance business during the Great Depression and then ran an evangelistic radio broadcast on the weekends. And so that's
Please
just
tell
kind
me
of,
you have some of those vintage recordings.
I don't, I wish I did. I really do. Because I hear about it, and I also hear that Orville was kind of a hard man. So I have a hard time reconciling those two things in my brain. But I
I don't
really
know,
wish
man.
I
I feel
did.
like if you were an evangelist coming out of the depression in the 20s, you probably were hardened to a certain degree.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Especially so I'm from the Western Maryland area, and Greencastle, Pennsylvania is where they were at. And my grandfather would tell stories about sharing the squirrel that his dad shot in the park on the way home. So there's a little bit of hard scrabble element to the family. So I got into it because it was a family business, and I was selling, my first job out of college was I worked at Hertz Rent a Car,
Hmm.
which the rental car business will teach you a lot
That's a
about
good
dealing
one,
with the
man.
public.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like finding producers that were at Enterprise or Hertz or a place like that because you honestly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like, and I know this to be true for Enterprise specifically, they get really, really good sales training while they're there, and they're held to very high production standards. And I mean, it's a brutal existence, honestly, from some of my friends that have been there. Steven Sedlak, who's been on the pod, actually just was on the podcast again last week, who's a really good producer and also leads with workers' comp, like I do, spent plenty of time at two of my favorites, ADP selling payroll and Enterprise, because he's from the St. Louis area, which is where Enterprise is domiciled. He worked there as well. But anytime I find somebody with that on their resume, my eyes open and my ears perk up because I feel like it's already a good candidate. Because if you can survive there, and this is my theory on any of these jobs that are like that, if you can survive there 3 to 5 years, you can come into the insurance industry and be very successful and feel like you're on vacation.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You know, I can remember the day would start at 7:30 in the morning. It would end at 6 p.m. You deal with the public. I got yelled at on the phone because I would have to eat lunch. There's no set lunch hour, so I'd be scarfing a McDonald's double cheeseburger, and people would get mad at me because I'm licking the oil off my teeth while I'm trying to talk to them on the phone. So yeah, if you can go to work every day and wear a tie and clean cars out in the cold and in snowstorms, you can sell insurance. So that was really good experience. And then I worked at a technology software vendor, and the first 3 months of that job, I did nothing but cold call. It
Mm.
was 3 months of cold calling. So once I got into the sales business, I thought if I'm going to do sales, I might as well do it in the family business. And the family business um, does a
I
lot of
got to believe
churches.
coming out of the software industry, you got to follow my good buddy Josh Braun
Yes.
on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. Yeah, he's a good one for that. I love everything that he puts out. It's so contrarian to what we're taught in our industry, and it actually works.
It does that laid back approach
Yep,
of, hey, you
100%
don't need to
detached.
push, to let them come to you. It's going to be okay. You don't need, just let the process come to you. Yeah, he's really really good. um so yeah, I got into insurance. We did mostly churches, and I'm a stubborn and kind of contrarian person myself. And I looked at the business and I thought, if the business is going to grow for 40 years, we're going to need to do something else proficiently other than churches. And so I just slugged away at it. The first thing I slugged away at was small businesses, and I just got my butt handed to me for years, years. And so, I used to take walks around the block with my mom, and one day she said, maybe you should try doing something a little bit closer to our ethos. And then a company rep from Markel walked in and asked, have you ever tried children's homes? And I said, no, I haven't done that. We insure a children's home. My grandpa helped start a children's home. Yeah, let me go ahead and give that a shot. So the first substantial account that I ever wrote was a group home for girls that did foster care placement services. And from there, Once I landed that account, I specifically remember when I got the order for that. I got a voicemail and the guy called me and he said, "Hey, good work. You got the deal. Now the real work begins." And I'm sitting in Baltimore pounding the roof of my car thinking, oh my gosh, I did it. I don't know how I did it. I probably did everything wrong in that process, but I got the deal, and that was the launching point. And once I did group homes, you can parlay group homes for children to group homes for the intellectually and developmentally disabled. You get into home health care. There's just a whole world out there. And what I found over time was that it's an incredibly underserved marketplace. When I listen to people in the insurance industry talk about who they serve and who they sell to, it's not hard to find trucking. It's not hard to find contracting. It's not hard to find manufacturing. It's really got hard to find somebody that serves health and human service organizations. And so being at a smaller agency and I was building out the product set from scratch, I felt like it was a little bit of guerrilla warfare. I had to zig when other people were zagging. And I had to find places in the marketplace where I could lean in and I could differentiate myself. Because if I was going to try and go directly at national brokers, I was just going to get my clock cleaned. And so what I found over time with health and human service organizations is it usually breaks down into like three categories about who's serving the organization from a broker perspective. You either have a national broker that doesn't care about them, it's probably too small. You got a regional broker that maybe has one or two, and they're placing it with a carrier that has a human services product, but that may be one of very few that they serve. And then three would be a mom and pop shop that really has no idea what they're doing. And so there was this tremendous space for somebody that was going to say, I'm going to make this my living. I'm going to make this what I do, to really differentiate themselves.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting, man, because I was on a coaching call with somebody this morning, and I literally said, "My best advice to you right now," and I gave her my advice, but I said, basically, I'm telling you, go where they ain't. Like, go to the places nobody is, and you will win there all the time. And I think that your analysis of the three different buckets is spot on. I think the other thing that I would say, and I almost hesitate to say this because I don't want people to get bright ideas, but I kind of do at the same time. At the end of the day, I think it's a very well kept secret. I don't think that a lot of agents realize how big some of these organizations are and how much real opportunity there is to earn commission or a service fee, depending on how you're compensated. But when you start thinking of social services and even in a broader scope, nonprofits, there is just a lot of opportunity there. And to your point, there aren't a lot of producers who specialize in it, but there also aren't a lot of underwriters who specialize in it. Like there's a handful, and we actually were fortunate enough. I don't know if you know Dylan Jordan, who was at Connected Risk, but now he's at Amwins. But he's one of the few that I can say this dude he knows what he's doing. Like I have, because if I were to walk in and have that opportunity, it's highly likely I would refer it to somebody else because it's just not in the wheelhouse of what we do. But if I were to work on it, I would know that I needed to learn things. And that's how I've done it my entire career. If it was something that I didn't know 100%, I needed to have a partner who knew it 100%. And then I would know it better the next time and better the next time. And he's a really good dude when it comes to the social services and nonprofit. And I mean, like his whole thing to me was, give me the hardest stuff you have to place. Like whatever you have that nobody else can get done, get that done for me. And anytime anybody inside of my online community asks for a reference on who could I go to for this, that's the first guy I think of every time. And I've never had anybody come back and give me bad feedback. But those guys are few and far between. And that's only in my experience. You're in the space. I have to believe like you know more of them, but there can't be that many people out there that you unequivocally trust to know that is good or better than what you do.
Yeah, I've known Dylan for a long time. He's a real good dude. I go back with him back to when he worked at Gateway Specialty Insurance, and I had to lean on people the same way that you're talking about it at first. there were a couple things I had to do in order to break into it. One, when you don't know what you're doing, you really do have to lean on people with more expertise. I think that's a big part of it. But then two, you have to really focus on educating yourself and building that expertise over time. One of the things I've observed with a lot of producers is that they'll do one thing, they'll do it one time, they'll never do it again. And so that knowledge never builds. And so for me, what I ended up doing is, this is a me thing. I'm a big reader, but I started reading textbooks for human service organizations. I read this textbook called What Works in Welfare. You want to talk about dry reading, but it was
Mm.
talking about what works in treatment foster care, what works in youth development, and getting into the technical aspects of a program. And that just gave me the vocabulary words that I knew on how to build on it. And then I started reading books about it. A couple of good ones would be like Matthew Desmond's Evicted, talking about issues with getting housing, especially if you've been evicted before, and how a lot of times people fall into this trap and it's not even their fault. So you got to educate yourself consistently. And over time, you build that knowledge. And another thought that I've had is that embrace the grind. Like I remember reading Vince Lombardi's speech about what it takes to be number one, right? And there's this one part where he says, I've never known a good man who didn't embrace the grind. And what I realized from that is it just takes time to build that expertise, and that becomes your point of differentiation over time. It's that knowledge that you've accumulated a little bit of time over a long period of time, so that when you're walking into a situation and you know their vocabulary, you know how they generate revenue, you know what they think about, you know what they're concerned about, that all comes from time and accumulated experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I say it all the time. This industry is not that hard. It's actually pretty easy. I mean, there is some technical knowledge you have to have, but the people who make it hard are the ones who don't want to put in the work. Like it's not like anybody's just going to come in and hand you anything. And I don't understand how that's any different than anything else in life, to be honest with you. But if you can come in and I mean, you were at Enterprise, I was in the grocery industry, probably also one of the most grueling industries to work in. I mean, I was pounding 100 hours a week, begging people to put $100 worth of groceries in their shopping cart so that we could at least make $1 in net profit, and try and keep the lights on. And you do that over and over and over again. And I look back on it and like those were the best years of my life, man. That was my whole 20s and my early part of my 30s that I was in that industry. And I always say I wish I would have gotten into insurance a lot earlier, but I don't know that I would have had the same level of production success as a producer if I wouldn't have had those 10 years under my belt. Because number one, I was already conditioned to work blue collar. Like I came in the first year, I was used to working 100 hours. Now I'm working 50. I'm working half as much as I used to, twice as much as my competition. I literally felt like I was on vacation every week, just putting in a solid 50-hour work week, which is still way more than a lot of our peers are putting in right now. Because let's face it, you can make a reasonable living in this industry with marginal effort. That's never who I want to be. I want to be try and be the absolute best that I can for myself, for my family, for my clients, for the people that I'm calling on. And I think that because of the conditioning that I had before I got here, it made it easier for me to do what I do now. But the other thing I think that made it easier for me, and it made it easier, but it wasn't easy, and you have the same credentials, was to get my CIC and my CRM. I got into the industry back when you had to drive to go get your CIC. There was no online CIC course. And look, we're not that old, man, but it wasn't that, it was not that long ago. But I've been in the industry 20 years now, so maybe it is. But I got my license and I worked like the whole time I was getting my license. I worked doing plumbing, tiling, and forming of swimming pools for my brother-in-law's dad, who was a pool builder here before the real estate market collapsed. and literally just made friends with all the subs on the job sites when I was doing that. I would go to school because in Florida, you have to have 200 hours. So I went to school for 5 weeks, 40 hours a week. I would leave school, come back, and by headlights be working in these swimming pools some nights till 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, getting tore up by mosquitoes. And I went, got my license, came back, and immediately wrote the subcontractors that I'd made friends with on the job sites. But I knew that I needed to know more than just have the relationships with the people. For me, the people part was the easy part. I needed, for my own comfort, to at least have a foundational understanding of what I was doing and what I was out there talking about and selling. Not that I think you have to know everything about insurance to start prospecting and producing. Let me be very clear. There's a lot of you out there listening that are looking for perfection before you take your first step. And I got to tell you, that's a you problem. It's just an excuse. You don't need to know every, endorsement, exclusion, whatever on every policy to go start. You're never going to see that stuff. In 20 years, I still learn something new at least a couple of times a week when I'm looking at something I haven't seen before from a carrier I haven't worked with or whatever else. But I needed to get that CIC foundation. So I started in July and I drove wherever I had to drive in the Southeast. And I had it by December of the same year, which at that point was like world record status to get it that fast because they didn't offer them close enough to where you lived for you to get it in that cadence. But I drove up to Birmingham, Atlanta, down to the southeast part of the state. And I did it the wrong way because I took 5 CICs. I didn't realize at the time that if I was going to pursue my CRM, I could have used a CRM for my 5th one and only taken 9 total courses for both. But I did my CIC, and then immediately when I realized I needed to have continuing ed, that's when I started getting my CRM designation. And it's debatable which one I use more on a daily basis. I feel like I use my CRM more, but I also feel like the insurance stuff at this point is more like second nature to me. So you don't even realize that you're using something that you wouldn't have known if you wouldn't have gotten the designation. But I think now the people that pursue that stuff have it a lot easier because the National Alliance has made it very, very easy for you to go and do that stuff online and inexpensive. You can buy the subscription for like $700 or $800 a year and take as many of their courses as you want. And even though, I'm 15 years, I think I just got my certificate that I've had my CIC, I still buy that subscription for myself every year. And I have an iPad that sits on my desk and I'm not going for the continuing ed credits. I don't, I'll do it on one and pay full attention and make sure I'm checking the box so I get credit for it. But a lot of times I'll just go sit in those sessions and let them play on my iPad while I'm sitting here working on something else. And I'm just listening like people listen to a podcast. And, it's a way that I can continue to stay on top of the things that are going on. And, I think that that's someplace every producer that's listening to this really needs to invest in themselves. I've been talking about it, pretty consistently for the last couple of weeks on podcasts now, but I think our industry does a disservice to themselves by not really investing in your own betterment and your own continuing ed.
100% on that. I mean, you're making me feel old because I've been in the business about 15 years. I think I've had my CIC and CRM. I did all those classes in person too. I remember I was probably 23 or 24. I was going to the bathroom and washing my hands in between a session, and an older guy walked in and he looked at me and said, "Is this your first one?" I said, "Yep." He said, "All right, here's a tip. They usually ask one question for every hour." And I took that for every single class that I took after that. It's like, I'm gonna segment all my studying for one
100%,
question
man.
per hour.
100% how I did it too.
Yeah. And I developed systems on how I did it. And I did all those classes in person. I remember going to Philadelphia and being alone in a hotel room for 3 hours. One question I had for you, thinking about your experience working in grocery stores, and I've heard you talk about being responsible for a profit and loss statement well before you got into agency ownership and well before you got into selling insurance. One, did you try and sell to grocery stores when you were getting started and use that as a point of expertise? And two, do you think that having experience managing a profit and loss statement so that helped you see things from the perspective of an owner?
So the answer to number one is a very emphatic and quick no. I was so sick of the grocery industry and retail by the time I got out that I didn't want to go back into it. I'm actually working on putting together a product offering in terms of our services now to where I can go to independent and Hispanic grocery stores. And even we have a bunch of international ones down here now. And I think that we could do very well with it. And I'm far enough removed from it that in a sick and twisted way, I do miss it some days, especially the rat race around the holidays and everything else. But I do think that it would give me a leg up and help me dramatically because I understand the inner workings, the risk exposures, and all of that. But to number two, the profit and loss, definitely, because, when I didn't have the insurance knowledge, I could go in and talk about business operations and I could talk about how they were managing things profitably, which was a more of a risk management, total cost of risk type discussion. But even more than that, and so I do think that that helped me. But the other thing that I gained from that experience is a lot of HR. There are few industries worse for EPLI than restaurants and grocery stores. And I unfortunately, but also unfortunately, had been part of and let me be very, very clear. I was on the stand in federal court. This had nothing to do with my own actions, but the store that I was in at the time had a class action lawsuit that had been brought against it for racial and sexual discrimination. And ultimately, the plaintiffs won that case. And at that time, it was the largest settlement ever for a case like that in the United States. And then Walmart said, "Hold my beer." And they went and just did 10x that when they got nailed. But it was a very eye-opening experience for me. And, I grew up in a house, Southern Baptist household where you treated everybody the way that you want to be treated and, really didn't think anything of it. I was blessed that I grew up in a very diverse cultural area. So, different races and things weren't really anything that was out of the ordinary. It's who we were. We grew up and, you had friends that were all colors and everything. But the other thing that really I think helped me, and it even helps me today, is that I had a baseball scholarship coming out of high school and I blew my arm out and I also blew my college because I was like the Amish going into the wild my freshman year. I grew up in a really conservative home and, was shielded from a lot that I decided was probably a good idea to explore while I was a freshman in college. And so college, the first time was a relatively short endeavor, but I ended up going back. When I was working full time, I was literally running a grocery store, 90, 100 hours a week. And I was going to school at night full time to finish getting my degree. And the best part about that experience, and I think this is why I got way more out of college the second time, not just because I was serious, but I was in school with people who were mid-level managers that were in the adult studies program. So they were and I was in Birmingham Southern is where I finally got my degree from, but they were mid-level managers for Bell South, Alabama Power, Southern Natural Gas. And a lot of them were there because they had company incented, education reimbursement programs. And a lot of them were also minorities that were incented to go and get their degrees. And so here I am sitting in Birmingham, Alabama at a liberal arts Methodist institution, taking classes on things like race and ethnic relations and all of the sociology and that kind of stuff, not just learning about it from a textbook, but literally sitting in the room with the people who had lived through all of that in their life. And, I got such a more impactful education by hearing the stories and really putting reality behind what would normally just be read, memorized, and regurgitated for a test. And because of that, it makes me a lot more empathetic and a lot more attentive about differentiation and whether it be cultural or whatever in any conversation that I'm in now, because I respect everybody from a different level because I was taught that not because I read it in a book, but because I heard the stories that basically said, yeah, this is how it happened in the book, but then this is the stuff they didn't put in the book. And I think that was a huge thing, but it helped me a lot from an HR perspective. And so when all of this stuff went down and the settlement for that class action came out, two things happened. Number one, when I found out that 13 of the 15 plaintiffs were working in the store that I had been assigned as a store manager, and this happened before I got there, obviously, I asked my district manager, why didn't you tell me these people were here? And he said, would you run the store any different if you knew? And I'm like, okay, fair enough. And I had a good enough relationship with everybody there. I realized that my job was to lead, not to manage, not to micromanage for sure. And so my day started off every day with literally just doing a lap around what we called the racetrack in the store. That's just the perimeter. But I was a politician, man, shaking hands, kissing babies, noticing, asking about families, kids, how'd the Little League game go last night? Probably working in what's our plans for today? How are we going to do it or whatever? But I had a really good relationship with the people that were on my team, like everybody from the bag boy all the way up to my co-manager. And I'm actually connected to all these people on social to this day. We kind of rekindled things when Facebook became a thing. But I asked the people that were the plaintiffs in the suit, probably, a little bit of a ballsy move, to be honest with you, because that's kind of a hair trigger that in the South, you don't really want to play with too much. But I just asked them, why? Just tell me, like, what really happened now that all this is said and done. What happened? Because I don't want to make the same mistakes. And they said, honestly, David, if you were here, none of this ever would have happened. This was all 100% legitimate. And that validated to me that if you can make the connection with people, you can drive the change that you want to see. And I think that's directly translatable to being successful in the production role. And if you're responsible for people, especially if you're responsible for people where things have gotten a little left of center and you've had to right the ship or whatever, you can be a good resource to that business owner who's probably only owned this business or is new in owning a business and be able to give them advice, even at a very young age, that I had experienced. And so I think that looking at it from that perspective, I became really, really good at relying on what I was strong at. So if a question was asked to me, I was great at deflecting it and turning it into something that was an operational issue I could discuss and then get back to them and talk to them about the insurance when I would get the answer.
100%. I love to answer the question I wish people had asked me, not necessarily the one they did ask me. And that helps you reframe the whole conversation. Oh man, there's like three things in that whole story that I loved and I want to speak to. Is like one of the things I think people in the insurance industry get lost about is we think that the business is about insurance. And what the business is about is people and business. Like we are business consultants and our product is insurance. So first and foremost, what we need to be able to do is understand who we're talking to and the stories that they're telling and be open and honest about what's going on. So you're talking to people about stories that are really vulnerable, very painful. It's really easy to step on toes. I mean,
But
we're
if you
not going to
take
talk.
the chance, you're going to get to where you want to be with that person and you'll have a deeper relationship. And it's that the biggest bias that we have is we focus on what pays us, not the problem that needs to be solved. We immediately go to insurance policies because we get commission for placing that instead of looking at, okay, what's the real problem here? And sometimes, guess what? That problem might not mean that you have to sell them an insurance policy to fix it. But if you help them solve the problem, you'll write more policies than you could ever imagine.
100%. Because it works multiple ways. One, they'll feel more comfortable with you. Two, the underwriter's going to feel more comfortable with you because you're talking about the business. One thing I've seen over and over and over again working with human service organizations is that if I understand what they're doing, why they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they're doing it, I can fill out an application. I can figure out which coverages they need. But the first thing that needs to happen is I need to understand what's going on. The second thing that another thing I want to talk about, just hearing you talk about it, that I think is relevant to human service organizations is I deal with a lot of very, very vulnerable topics and topics where
They're going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, quite honestly.
Correct. I'm working with people that run domestic violence shelters. I'm working with people in recovery. I'm working with people that are running home health agencies. I'm working with people that are advocating for minorities. I'm not a minority. I'm a white guy. Like, and I'm under 40. I don't have any issues with privilege in America, but I have to be able to ask questions and try and understand where they're coming from. And if you spend enough time with health and human service organizations, you're going to hear some painful stories. Like, um, I think working with health and human service organizations, you're setting yourself up to be willing to stare into the abyss of the human condition. Because if you're going to work with people in recovery, you're working with programs that are usually run by people in recovery that have burned every bridge on the way down and are helping other people that have burned every bridge on the way down. And they have some crazy stories. I mean, I grew up loving movies like Heat and all these gangster movies and what's the Scorsese movie, Goodfellas, like the drug dealer stories. Those people are my clients now, and it's crazy. I'm talking to people that ran cocaine from Colombia. I'm talking to people that were stuck up kids and they've got mug shots that where they look like Marilyn Manson. And I get to hear some of the best stories. Um, and the reason that I think I've been able to resonate with them, and I honestly I don't know why I resonate with them. I love that I resonate with them, but I couldn't tell you everything why. But I just love hearing the stories. I love hearing the story that they went through to get to recovery. I love hearing the why because the why with these organizations is so compelling. I'm so drawn to these industries because I think I'm dealing with the best people in the world. Usually, I'm dealing with the people that have been traumatically hurt in a terrible way. They've been abused, neglected, beat, forgotten, pushed down. And they are the redemption stories. They're the people that came back. They're the people that built these organizations are entrepreneurs. They got out of prison. I read this one guy's story. His name's Bruce White. You can go check out his book. He talks about going to prison for drugs, and I've talked to him in person. He would tell anybody. He would say the first 30 days in prison were the worst because he was in withdrawal for everything. And if there was something where he could have hung himself, he would have done it because he just didn't sleep for 30 days. And he gets out of prison, there's no place for him to live. So he's going into any apartment building in Baltimore that he can get into with no bed. There's no place to sleep. He can't get a job. He's got mice that are crawling on top of him in the middle of the night because he because it's a bad building and he just doesn't have anywhere to go. And so when I started writing about social service entrepreneurs, he's solving a problem. He's solving a problem for people that he uh, he understands better than everybody else, and he built a program to solve that problem. He set up recovery program, DUI counseling, and he is uniquely set up to solve it because he's got this unique blend of experiences. One, he's a businessman. I think in this world, he may be the only person I can say is a better dressed man than you, David.
Yeah.
Uh, but he's a businessman. He understands recovery, and he's committed to them. And so those types of people are fascinating. And I get to meet people like that of all walks of life. There's another guy that I met. I was
Well,
thinking
another
about.
part of it though is like like some of these criminals that are recovering or addicts that are recovering themselves are honestly some of the most resourceful and entrepreneurial people you're going to find. They're just misguided in where they spend that energy. And there's a meme that's been popping around Facebook or Instagram for the last couple of weeks. I don't know what somebody's trying to tell me. It keeps showing up in my feed, but it's like a crackhead doesn't wake up in the morning, and figure out all the reasons why they can't get their fix or whatever. They figure out how to how to get it done. Don't let a crackhead be better than you.
It's so true. And it's so driven. They'll tell you those stories. They'll tell you people do some terrible things for it, but they come back. People come back. And to me, that's why I love what I do is because I get to be a part of the stories where people come back. Um, Whether it's foster care and people that are just forgotten by their parents, or addiction, where people come back from hurting themselves. And if you think about the mind of a person that's addicted to something and how out of control you must be, like you wake up and there's something outside of you that dictates your every move. That everything you're going to do that day is focused around going and getting this thing that is killing you. And I've loved being around people in recovery because they are the most honest people you'll ever meet too. I've come to the conclusion that everyone could benefit from studying the 12 steps, because when you're in recovery, you have I don't want to say it's a benefit, but you are presented with this thing that if you don't address it, it's going to kill you. Sooner or later, this substance is going to kill you. We all have stuff in that like that in our lives, right? It's just that for some of us, it's going to be a long, slow death where we end up feeling sad and lonely and we don't know why. And part of it is we've just never had to be honest with ourselves. So I feel like doing what I've done, it's given me this chance to be around wonderful people that have made me better in ways I never would have expected.
I think that that translates to literally almost anything that any kind of business that we work in, though, if you focus on the people. And again, man, Marcus Lemonis in The Prophet, he goes in every place he goes in, he to focus on the people, the product, and the process. That's it. Why do we do any different in our industry? And I think that if you focus on the people, the product, and the process of who we're talking to and take it away from ourselves. Look, these people know we sell insurance. That's what we told them when we booked the appointment. We don't need to go vomit it all over them when we get there, but focus on them. If you want to differentiate yourself from the at the point of sale, here are two things that I've always tried to do, and I've gotten really, really good at them after 20 years of practice. Number one, I can go for an entire hour first meeting and never even say the word insurance anymore. Outside of the fact that I tell people the name of I understand that you likely despise insurance and you think it's a racket. I'm going to tell you, I don't like it that much either. And I don't like it so much that it's not even the name of my firm. It's Florida Risk Partners for a reason. So we're not going to talk about insurance today. I'm here to talk about you, your business, and what problems you may be facing. And now we have insurance completely off the table. We know how to write the insurance. What we don't do a great job of is learning about what we're actually insuring. Better than 50% of the people listening to this podcast right now have accounts on their books where they insure something they have never seen or touched, whether it be a building, whether it be the actual casualty portion of it. They may have written workers' comp over the phone. And my question is, how do you know you did it right? You've got to go in and focus on the other person and take the spotlight off of yourself, and the business will automatically come to you. But until we quit selling products and start solving problems, you're never going to maximize how much you can absolutely earn in any given year. And I think that that's an important lesson. I say it all the time. I'll probably not stop saying it. I'd say it to my sons that are in the agency. I say it to my producers, but we really need to focus on what are the problems people are facing and how can we solve them? And guess what? Insurance isn't always the answer.
No, I would say most times it's not. Sometimes it is, but more times than not, people are looking for someone that understands them, that are going to make them feel comfortable, that are going to make them feel confident that you've got it right. And at the end of the day, when they're hiring a broker, they're hiring someone to tell their story. So why would they ever want to hire someone that doesn't know how to tell their story?
Bingo.
And I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you're serving. If you don't know how to tell your client's story, you're not going to win clients. You're not going to win underwriters. And so to me, I've really feel this way. It's one of my pet peeves. I don't like words that have no meaning. I like small, simple words. I like stories. When I read books, I like John Steinbeck and Hemingway and Don Winslow. I like guys that use short, simple language to tell a story, because if if you lose your audience, then it doesn't matter what you say. And if what you're saying is impenetrable, it doesn't matter if there's gems in there. You have to find a way to bundle what you're saying in a way that can be heard. And that's talking to people about what they do every day. And it's being an insurance translator. It's helping them envision what happens in a business every day. And then how do you can translate that into an insurance form and then say, hey, look, yeah, somebody comes back and talks about discrimination in your operation. The coverage that we're talking about there is employment practices liability insurance. But what we're talking about is this very human situation where somebody came into work. Like I read this story in the Insurance Journal. A woman applied for a job at a penal institution in Texas. She got the job. She shows up the first day and she wears this full dress. And the HR manager says, that's not going to work here. You can't work in the correctional facility with a full dress. And she came back and sued for religious discrimination because she needed to wear that dress to comply with her religion. And she won. And she won $75,000. People, they don't resonate with being the story of employment practices liability will protect you if you're sued for wrongful hiring and firing. They do resonate when you tell the story of, hey, this is what happened. This person was a little bit crazy, and the employer was using good common sense and lost anyway. The human story always wins.
100%. And, you know, again, going into more value proposition related stuff as opposed to just selling the EPLI, which is obviously extremely important, but I'm going to give you guys a pathway to sell the EPLI. Ask the questions like, talk to me about your discrimination and harassment policy. Talk to me about the training that you provide annually. How do you deliver that? How do you document that? Talk to me about your progressive disciplinary policy. Ask these questions around what's going on in the HR function, because more than likely, if you're dealing with the types of accounts we walk into, they might have some idea of what you're talking about. They may have some semblance of it, but it's not documented. It's not done with any regularity. And then we have service providers that we use that we can come in that will actually give them the ability to have a learning management system around all of those things where they're going to be in compliance. They're going to be able to document it, because at the end of the day, two things come from that. Number one, you have a much more robust submission when you're going to underwriting. If you're not just going online and quoting where you can spend, 3 minutes answering 5 questions and get a bindable quote, you're actually representing your client the right way. But number two, you're giving your client a defensible position in a court. If they don't have those things and you help them put those things in place, and then down the road something comes back, now they can say, well, listen, we've given everybody the training. We've, here's how we've documented that. This is our disciplinary policy on these things. And this person is simply a rogue employee, but you can see that we've done everything we're supposed to do. They're going to be a lot more sympathetic to you as an employer than if you just say, yeah, we bought some insurance that was supposed to defend us and take care of it. We've not really done anything to make sure it doesn't happen here.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, what we're doing there when we do that for people is, yes, it's risk management, but we're helping them build the systems that are going to help them scale their business. Like when we're dealing with entrepreneurs that run fast, they run hard, they are not thinking about the risk. Like they wouldn't start a business if they were risk conscientious people. So
and they're certainly not thinking about it 3 years or 5 years down the road when they actually are scaled to a reasonable level.
No, they're not wired that way. That's not the type of people we're dealing with. We're dealing with people that are first solving problems and let the consequences be what they are. We're helping come behind them. And I think about the book Traction, where you got the visionary person and then you got the implementer, right? The integrator. And as risk management professionals, we help with that integrator role. We're going in and we're helping them build the systems behind them that are going to protect their downside. We're helping them think through hiring and firing. We're helping them think through abuse and molestation prevention. We're helping them think through vehicle safety, all these things that could just explode their vision as an organization if they don't make sure it's done correctly. So that's where I really see how we fit in with the business, is helping them solidify their operations and their systems.
Well, and I'll tell you, man, as we wrap up, to your point earlier, when you're dealing with people like that, the last thing they want is to pick up the phone to call one of us, and every time they call, we're trying to sell them something else. You've got to go in and demonstrate that you understand where they're coming from, the problems they face, and that you're the solution to the problem, so that you are the one they're calling when they need the advice, because they're 100% confident you can help them. And if you can't, you at least have a network of people that you could get them to the person who could help them. But if you're only trying to sell them insurance every time they call you for something that's going on in their business, not only are you going to be perceived as self-serving, they're going to quit calling, because you're not solving the problem they have. You're lining your own pocket. And I think that's so important when you're dealing with entrepreneurial people. I'm an extremely entrepreneurial person myself. I play the role of the integrator in my job, but in my business, I'm the visionary. Like, I'm the worst integrator ever in the agency. I have to have handlers to make sure that the stuff I see actually happens and gets done, because I cannot be both. It's just not who I am. I can be one or the other, but the agency needs me to be the visionary. My clients need me to be the integrator. And so I'm kind of like a double agent that way. But I think it's really, really important that we emphasize that when we're dealing with these people that are running businesses, many times they are the visionary, and they need us to be, the integrator for them, so that they're not going to make stupid mistakes. And I mean, that's one of the hardest messages to relay, specifically to an entrepreneur, is, hey, I know where this is going to be 3 to 5 years from now. If you make this decision now, this is where I would recommend you go, and here's why I would do that, and lay it out and give them a valid reason why. The last thing I would say as we wrap up is, technology has made it a whole lot easier for us to tell stories around what we do, as opposed to just simply, again, regurgitating policy language and endorsements and exclusions and all of that. And I would challenge any of you, if you want to get better at the point of sale and you really are technically sound, type what your answer to the normal questions you face would be into Chat GPT, and then ask it to give it to you in layman's terms, and then practice those answers when you're at the point of sale, because it's a really easy cheat sheet to make things simple for you to understand. Sometimes we're so embedded in the industry and we're so good technically that it's just really hard to remove yourself from that and step back and think like somebody who doesn't understand anything of what we do. So if you find yourself in that role, use the tech tools that you have to help you. I'm not saying that it's going to be 100% perfect, but it'll certainly help you get things to whatever reading level you want, so that you can articulate it. And you can even put it in the form of a story if you want. I also do the same thing. I've got a bad habit of wanting to fire off a response right away if something hits me the wrong way. Instead of me typing an email and hitting send, I hit it into Chat GPT and say, please formulate a professional response, based on this answer. And guess what? I've not gotten in trouble since I started doing that. So,
hey, that's good. That's good practice. As Warren Buffett says, you can always tell someone to go to HELL tomorrow. So, don't do it today.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listen, man, I'm sure you're going to have people who want to reach out to you. Tell them where they can find you, and get in touch with you as we wrap up.
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm Daryl Henry. I post 6 times a week about insurance and sales related topics, and I love the conversations that happen there.
Awesome, man. Daryl, really appreciate you coming on, my man. I'm going to bounce because I got people in the waiting room, but thank you so much. Look forward to this episode coming out. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it.
Thanks, David.
All right, brother. Have a good weekend.
You too.